All right, y'all, welcome to the show. It is Tuesday, September 20th. Got some cool stuff for you today. So we have a Newsmax host, Greg Kelly, who has decided he understands exactly what is leading to the downfall of the United States of America. You're going to love his answer. His answer is glorious. I also have a New Hampshire Republican is distancing himself from himself because he realizes how extreme he is. This is great. This is something that we're going to see a lot more of in the Trump era. We're going to see all these politicians who need to posture a certain way to get through the primary, but then they jam on the brakes and go in reverse when it comes to the general because they know that they're basically dead in the water if they don't do that. And then I have the Biden administration low-key morphing into Dark Brandon again. If Biden actually pulls off the thing that he's currently trying to pull off, it'll be another notch in the victory column, and it'll be a really, really serious one. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about much, much more. Let's go ahead and jump into it here. So this is in the New York Post. MSNBC's Stephanie Ruhle slams Pelosi over stalled Congress stock trading ban. Color me shocked over this one because MSNBC host turning on Democratic politicians is like seeing a Sasquatch in the wild. Like that shit just it's not real. Or like a chupacabra. You know what a chupacabra is? Very few people do. Anyway, so here's what they say. MSNBC anchor Stephanie Ruhle ripped House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on Monday night for slow-walking proposed legislation that would bar members of Congress from trading stocks while in office. Ruhle criticized the speaker during a conversation with Democratic Representative Abigail Spanberger of Virginia, one of several lawmakers who has submitted proposals that would ban congressional stock trading. Quote, "It's legal to be sleazy, especially in the case for members of Congress." She wrote this legislation in 2020. Nancy Pelosi has had months and months and months to bring this thing to the floor, Ruhle said during MSNBC's The 11th Hour. Ruhle pointed out, I think there's a typo there. Ruhle pointed out that Congress would go on recess. I think it's supposed to say Ruhle pointed out that Congress would go on recess September 30th, giving lawmakers the limited window to consider a stock trading ban before the current session ends. Quote, "You've got a little over 2 weeks. Is there any chance Speaker Pelosi brings this thing to a vote? You can't blame Republicans on this one," she added. Spanberger and Representative Chip Roy, who's a Republican of Texas, have co-sponsored a bill that would ban lawmakers from trading stocks and require both them and their close family members to place assets in a blind trust while in office. The proposals are meant to address mounting concerns about the potential for insider trading involving sensitive information discussed in closed-door briefings. Spanberger agreed with Ruhle's point, noting her bill has garnered bipartisan support and more than 67 co-sponsors, Democrats and Republicans across the ideological spectrum. What I can tell you is this. If the Speaker wanted to bring it for a vote this week or this month, she certainly could. And so we've seen kind of stall tactics along the way, Spanberger said. The Post reached out to Pelosi's office for comment. Media was the first to report on the segment. Pelosi has faced mounting bipartisan pressure to move legislation forward, with critics pointing to her husband, Paul Pelosi's stock trades as a potential conflict of interest. You don't say. The Speaker has also drawn scrutiny over her lukewarm response to calls for tightened laws. Pelosi initially signaled she was against a ban that singled out lawmakers, but later softened her stance and suggested she would support a bill if it drew backing from congressional colleagues. A recent analysis found that nearly 20% of congressional lawmakers made stock trades related to industries they oversaw through committee assignments. So we reported on this the other day. I think it was originally from the New York Times. In the past 2 or 3 years, there were 3,700 sketchy, corrupt trades that were going on in Congress. This is one of those issues where there are no two sides. There is no reasonable opposition to the idea of banning Congresspeople from trading stocks. And by the way, again, they're close families, because that's exactly what we've seen with Nancy Pelosi. The way she skirts around it is, she'll tell her husband, Paul, everything that's going on with various bills or various committee hearings, and he takes that information and that knowledge and bets in the stock market accordingly. So one example is there was a push for antitrust legislation against Google, and as soon as Pelosi and the lawmakers knew we're just really doing a virtue signaling thing here. There's going to be no actual crackdown. There's going to be no, antitrust or anti-monopoly legislation that's effective against Google. She told Paul Pelosi that. Paul Pelosi bought stocks. And then as soon as, that was reported in the press and everybody else learned, oh, this is toothless, Google's stock shot up. My dyslexia is peeking through, guys. So now that's just one example. We also know, I'm sure you guys remember, back in the 2020 election when we got to Georgia, where it was Loeffler and Perdue were the two Republicans running for the U.S. Senate. They were incumbents, and they were up against Ossoff and Warnock. There were two things that won it for Ossoff and Warnock. One of them was the $2,000 checks that they were saying, we're going to get you the money, we're going to get you the money, we're going to get you the money. And then the other thing was, it was Perdue and Loeffler who were caught among a group of senators who were told in a closed-door briefing just before COVID took a turn for the worse and the market tanked. They were warned, hey guys, COVID is going to take a turn for the worse and the market is going to tank. And so they went and they sold millions of dollars worth of stock and they got out just before the crash. So now, again, these are just two examples. There are 3,700 sketchy trades that happened in the past 2 or 3 years. Another example of this stuff is a guy by the name of Tom Price, who's a former Republican representative, was picked by Trump to be the head of, I believe it was Health and Human Services. And what he did was, as a congressperson, he was on a committee that passed some favorable legislation, or was moving along favorable legislation to this medical device company, and then he turned around and invested in that medical device company and made a tremendous amount of money off of it. So, I mean, this is the way that it really works. This is the way that the sausage is made. And they've gotten so entitled in Washington, D.C., and so used to the corruption that they don't even think anything of it. It's like when Dan Crenshaw was like, look, why do you want to ban us from bettering ourselves? And that was a question about the stock ban. Like, hey, isn't it kind of messed up, the stock ban thing? He's like, why would you want to ban us from bettering ourselves? Bettering yourselves? What are you talking about? You already make over $100,000 a year, and now you just want the ability to sell the fuck out, make money in the stock market, and then also they love the revolving door. They love helping out corporations and then being hired as lobbyists for those corporations after the fact. It's like Pelosi said. Pelosi was saying, we're a free market and we should be able to participate in that. In other words, like, yeah, let us continue to be corrupt. And guys, I mean, you don't need me to tell you this, but this is how we've gotten to a point where the politicians, first and foremost, represent the lobbyists, the special interests, the corporations, the CEOs, the billionaires, and what average people want rarely becomes legislation. It's that old Princeton study that broke it down. Moneyed interests are very likely to get whatever they want as policy, whereas the working class, run-of-the-mill people, regular voters, are not really represented by DC. And this is how you get a situation where oftentimes the approval of Congress is like 18%. Because nobody likes them, and they're right not to like them. I mean, this is crazy what we're talking about here. So, to have an MSNBC host call out Nancy Pelosi is something. Now, I will say this. My sense is this isn't going to move the ball at all. But if you were to have a full court press in the media, that could move the ball. If you were to have not just MSNBC, but Fox News, CNN, the Nightly News, the New York Times, the Washington Post, if we could somehow get to a place where, in these last couple weeks, they relentlessly push Pelosi and they say, this is egregious, this is unconscionable, this is ridiculous, why are we even having this conversation? We need to act on this and need to act on it right now. With enough political pressure, I do think they can move Congress, they can move Pelosi, and they can get this thing done. But I don't see the media doing that. I mean, one of the few examples of the media doing this and getting away with it and it working is when they shamed Jen Psaki, because Jen Psaki, the issue was like free COVID tests. And Jen Psaki very snidely fired back at a reporter and said, well, what do you want us to do? Have like free tests for everybody in the country? And the reporter was like, yeah, that's exactly what I want. Other countries have that. Why can't we have that? And what happened after that was interesting. It was such an embarrassing moment for the White House, and the entire media got on the same page, from right-wing media to corporate centrist media. There is no real left-wing media, but all of the mainstream media players got on the same page where they were like, this is gross. This is absolutely disgusting. Like, you're mocking a question that's a perfectly reasonable question, and that shamed the White House effectively, where Biden announced soon thereafter, yeah, we're going to do free COVID tests for everybody. So that full court press of media attention can work, but unfortunately, Stephanie Ruhle's like the only one talking about it. You have all of like new media's talking about it, but Stephanie Ruhle is the only one talking about it in mainstream media. By the way, don't get it twisted. Stephanie Ruhle is terrible on most issues. This is just one where she happens to be correct. And I think what annoys her about it is that there are these sorts of ethics rules even around like corporations. A lot of corporations have ethics rules that are stronger than what there are for Congress. So she thinks that's ridiculous the way it works right now, and she's correct about that. But again, change can happen if the media all gets on the same page. I don't foresee them all getting on the same page, though, which is a bit of a disaster. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.